table. If you need one, come get one. Make sure we got a lot of ground to cover tonight. Good evening, everybody. So, for those of you that are on Facebook, I know some of you aren't, but we were able, as a result of our shut-in communion ministry, to immerse a fellow into Christ just shortly after 6 o'clock here tonight. So you may have seen him coming through on your way in or out. What was his name again? Andrew. And so a fellow by the name of John Smith, who is Joel Smith's brother, who we were associated with through Whitewater Camp, and others that have been in the nursing home. We were able to be introduced to this fellow, and as I understand it, through John's teaching, was able to learn what he needed to learn, and he realized he needed to be immersed, so we were able to do that here tonight, which was a real blessing. So, the reason I say I was able to record it, and I'll be posting it later tonight on social media if you want to see it. One other quick announcement. On the shirts, I was able to find out today that we will be able to get a very similar color to the ones we had already picked out, and we can get those in long sleeve as well. And we are also in the long sleeve and a similar color, the same as the long sleeve. We will have youth sizes available too. So I'm going to have a brand new order form available. I got bombarded with requests for all sorts of different things, and I thought, well, I'll see what I can figure out. And so if you've already have a shirt order in and you want to change the long sleeve, we can work that out. So just let me know. But and if you need youth sizes, the new forms will be available Sunday. Okay? So be looking for that. Yeah, the long sleeve will be an additional $5. They cost more. So, yeah. What was the other question? I saw a hand. Yeah, that'll be on the order form. So long sleeves are a little bit more. So, okay. Alrighty. Does anybody need a lesson? Everybody got a lesson? Excellent. Well, we're going to be picking up with an Exodus chapter 32. And we are on the heels of Moses receiving some information. What information was that? Primarily what? Yeah, the instructions for the tabernacle. That was a huge part of it. What else? Was that all that he got? You got to speak up. I can't hear. The ark. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant. So the tabernacle and all its contents, its furniture is sometimes the word is used. So that's kind of all together. Something else, though, he got very specific instructions on. What about the priest? Okay, so their duties and their consecration. Something else with the priest? Their clothing, what they would wear. So there's all sorts of instructions and blueprints and who knows what else he was able to take down in that 40 days. So he's up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and we had a discussion about another individual that may or may not have been a part of this or near it. Who was that? Joshua. We have some indications that he was somewhere up on the mountain with Moses. We don't know exactly where, and we're going to have further confirmation tonight about his whereabouts and some things he was privileged to be a part of. So that led us to the things that we had seen and all the different details, and we said we were going to eventually have a lesson on the typology of the tabernacle and its contents, which we will be doing that. But tonight we're finishing up this lesson, which is titled, back if you remember at the beginning, The Golden Calf Tragedy. And indeed, it was. Now, On our lesson notes here on page 5, hardly had the details for the mechanism of the covenant been elaborated, then Israel's disobedience almost destroyed it. Yet Yahweh threatened to destroy the nation and start all over with Moses, but Moses interceded. Moses destroyed the tablets, which canceled the newly ratified covenant and destroyed the golden calf. And that came from Randall C. Bailey in the College Press NIV commentary. Now, the account of this great apostasy at Sinai is one of the saddest in the Old Testament, and we're going to look at 4 different developments that happen here in this narrative. Now, we say the word apostasy. What does that mean, apostasy? Falling away, yeah. It's a falling away. So there was a falling away, an apostasy. Would you like a lesson? So you can, okay. There you go. You're very welcome. So we made reference to this last week, that while Moses was getting all his instructions, there was stuff happening below on the mountain. So we're going to look at some scriptures here. So let's begin with chapter 32, verses 1 through 6. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So, leading in the apostasy here, the people in the camp began to despair of ever seeing Moses again. He had been in the flaming cloud-covered mount for 40 days without food or water. Now, that statement, I'm not 100% sure where we get that idea that there was no food or water for him. Have you guys come across that? That there was no food or water? I'm not so sure that indeed was the case, but that could have been their perspective from below. You see what I'm saying? So what's that? He didn't take anything with him. He didn't have his picnic basket, his Yeti cooler. He did take Joshua. Right. Yeah. So even so, he certainly didn't have a 40-day supply of food. So what do they think? Yeah, he's been up there 40 days, 40 nights, no food and water. What they're witnessing up there too is quite the spectacle. So you're not coming back. So the obvious person to turn to was Aaron. So the people came to Aaron with a request that he make gods to lead them. With the disappearance of Moses, they believed that they had also lost the possibility of fellowship with Yahweh. They spoke contemptuously of their former leader. So when we see here it says, "This Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what became of him." That's in a very kind of a derogatory sense, in a way. Now, we don't have for us recorded here if Aaron was persuaded or not. Does it appear as if he was persuaded, that they rode him hard, they worked on him, they beat him down, and he finally gave in? Stepped up? Okay, it definitely seems like there was no hesitation here. Yeah. No hesitation, right? So I think it's very clear that Aaron didn't fuss. He didn't argue with the people. He gave them instructions to bring their earrings to him. It didn't take him long. He's like, "Here, well, I already know what we're going to do. Bring me your earrings, your gold, and then I know what I'm going to make." So now, some think that he was attempting to dissuade them by demanding the sacrifice of that which was very dear to Easterners, that being gold and their earrings. What are your thoughts on that? But he was asking something that was a high value to them in order to be, no, we're not going to do that. Go, what do you think about that? Well, I think what and Doc Smith in his research has found that it was of high value. Yeah. But was that Aaron saying, I'm going to ask for a lot here and hopefully they'll pipe down? Do you think that was his goal? Okay, celebrating? Yeah, yes. Go ahead. Not in this case. No, this is before that's even instituted. I mean, fully. I mean, we read about this that what was communicated to Moses, but that's not in effect yet. Yeah, I don't believe so. No, I think it just had to do with the monetary and the status of having such things. Yeah, I think that's what it was tied to, and that's why it was dear to Easterners. So, I don't think he was trying to appeal to that at all. I think he was all for this, and let's do this. Now, nonetheless, he melted down this gold and fashioned an idol cast in the form of a calf. Now, most likely, because we're going to find out later, most likely the core of this image was wood, and that it had an overlay of gold. That the whole thing wasn't solid gold, because we'll see later why that is the case. But that the solid core of wood, which Aaron covered with gold leaf. Aaron presented the idol to Israel with the announcement, "These are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." Now, here's something that you may not have picked up on before. See, Aaron intended this to be an image of Yahweh. So what are your thoughts on that? Why a cow? Why a calf? Okay. So that this was intended to be an image of Yahweh. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's Yahweh in the Hebrew. Yeah, what do you guys think? This image is supposed to represent Yahweh, and he made an image of it. So, I mean, it's not really that bad, right? I mean, his intentions were good. You guys remember that? Yeah, the apis was a sign of all sorts of things. It was an important, very important symbol in Egyptian. So I do think very much that idea carried over into Aaron's thinking and why he chose that. But this was supposed to represent a Yahweh. So it's interesting. So, now, Aaron intended this image to be a visible representation of Yahweh, or at least the sacred animal upon which Yahweh rode. Most gods of the period were associated with a sacred animal upon which they rode. Either they were half man, half animal, or they had an animal upon which they rode. Quit your laughing. Animal. You want to get up here? All right. So, an altar was built before the new image, and a festival was proclaimed in honor of Yahweh. Whole burnt offerings were presented and peace offerings in which the worshipers ate a portion of the animal. Okay, so let's think about this in this term. So they were worshiping Yahweh, which is good. Okay, they were a symbol. Okay. Now, do they have any reason not to do this at this point? They don't have any reason not to do this? They don't have any understanding of what they're doing? Hang on a second, I see your hand. Or are you answering this question because your hand was up before that? Okay. Had they? Remember what we talked about? Yeah, remember that and all that, and we determined that maybe even quite possibly that what they heard was directly from God Himself, from His mouth to their ears, and at the very least, they knew. Now, you guys remember too that there was something said twice, that it was repeated from the Decalogue. What was said twice? After it was all said and done, in chapter 20, right? You guys remember? After it was all said and done, something is reiterated after He gives the 10 Commandments. What was the one thing that was reiterated? Nope. Verse 23, chapter 20. This is the only thing that we found that was immediately restated. So if you tell your kids something more than once, why do you do it? Either they're not listening, or if they are listening, you want them to really what? To know and understand. You hear me? What's verse 23 say? You shall. Go ahead, Gary.
You shall not make other gods besides me, gods of silver or gods of gold. I don't understand why they would want to make an idol anyway, because God is coming in a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke.
Okay, so they already had a representation. Okay, why would they be drawn to this? They were, we're going to find out that they were stiff-necked, stubborn people. Okay, again, this is what they've witnessed their whole lives. Now, let's be honest here. The things that you witness your whole lives, the things that influence the way that you think, it's hard to divorce yourself from those all at once. Those things tend to creep back in on us, don't they? Yeah. Right. Right. I agree with you. You would think after all they had seen and witnessed and been through and stuff, they'd have been like, you guys remember what He just said not to do? But then here's the thing. Aaron, who had been like in the middle of all this, I mean, you could be someone kind of on the fringe of 2 million people, couldn't you? Maybe not paying attention that much. Right? And maybe like sort of get it. But I mean, here's Aaron, who's been front and center for all this, and he's like, all right, let's do this. Yeah. Not yet, but he's going to be. See, I wonder if he knew what was being said of him and what he was going to be and what he was going to be doing and stuff, if that would have been like, maybe it would have caused him to think twice a little bit. Larry? Okay. Well, if they understood that statement, well, let's think here for a minute. Where would they have that knowledge? Where would they have that knowledge? These Hebrews have been in Egyptian captivity. Would they have? Would their worldview be hammered home? You're made in the image of Yahweh. Maybe. How would they know? Through the Scriptures? They're not written yet. Okay. Sure. Well, yeah, Moses, we have to understand too, there was that stuff, especially in Genesis, was revealed to him. He didn't witness it.
You could take all our books away, and we would still follow Christ and tell what Christ is.
Right, and there's something to be said for oral tradition, sure. Yeah. They should have been, other than incidental things, there's not been any major plagues upon the people yet that were, or judgments, which would happen along the way. But basically, they all should, as a whole, be there. Are you okay? No, actually, I think the total time was. I'm trying to remember now. Back in our introductory studies, I don't want to tell you wrong. I think the number was, anybody remember? Randy, you remember off the top of your head how long they were in Egypt? Some say 2 something, some say 4 something. 215? Yeah, 215, but some say more. No, that wasn't the ones that went in. The ones that went into captivity were the Joseph in the following generations of the 12 tribes, the brothers with Jacob and his sons. So, but anyway, this generation that was led out is still the one that's present at Sinai. So let's move on. Some interesting stuff here that we're talking about. So there were whole burnt offerings, peace offerings in which the worshipers ate a portion of the animal. The people sat down to drink and rose up to indulge in revelry. So now Moses then learns of the apostasy. We're back in chapter 32, verses 7 through 18. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I have commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed to it, and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen the people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation.'" All right, I want to talk about this real quick. Read verse 7 again and tell me if you find anything interesting in it. Oh, you caught that right away, huh? All right, so I have had this said to me by my wife: "You need to get your daughter." You know what she's saying at that point? She's being rotten, and it's somehow related to you, not me. Right? All y'all have done that. I know you have. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, what an angel. Yeah, so isn't that interesting? Go down at once, for your people whom you brought up. I just get that kind of tone there. It's a very interesting phrase. Now, in the mount, Moses learned of what was taking place in the camp. God was prepared to wipe out that stiff-necked nation and build a new one from the descendants of Moses. Now, this proposal was designed to test Moses. To test Moses with regard to any possible ambition on his part. Now, what kind of ambition? Why would this be testing his ambition? Yeah. Yeah, see, at this point, who would that be? Abraham? Yeah, the promises were made to Abraham, so now it's like we're starting over. Moses would be held in that regard, and it would be starting over with him, and so this was designed to check any ambition on his part. Now, Moses passed the test. Verse 11, then Moses entreated the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people with whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak, saying, with evil intent he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy burning anger and change thy mind about doing harm to thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, the servants to whom you did swear by yourself and did say to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and all this land of which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. What are your thoughts about that prayer? He's pleading. Yeah, I mean, he's pleading. Yes, you can sense the urgency in him, the care and love. What else do you see in this prayer? This intercessory prayer. Okay. Yep. So yeah, you're kind of reiterating there what he's saying about that you led the people out to destroy them, right? Kind of restating some of that there. What's that? Like whose anger? Moses is angry, or that God is angry? That God is, I mean, he recognizes that God is rightfully angry at what's happening. Doug?
Well, just a minute ago, we were talking about testing Moses to replace Abraham, so to speak. And Moses is confirming, telling God, no, this is out of Abraham.
Yep.
He's confirming.
Okay.
It's not him, it's Abraham.
Right. So you guys are kind of restating some of what is here and making it kind of understanding it in a common language. But what about the nature of this prayer? Donnie? Okay, so Moses is stepping up here. I mean, this is really forcing him to be a leader, to beg and plead upon the behalf of the people. Yep, absolutely. This is a good turning point for Moses here, I would say. Absolutely. What more about the nature of this prayer? What do we see here? Randy? Yes, he has a proper focus upon God's glory. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this question. So, you've had your kids probably ask for things before, right? Never? Who said no? You're lying. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's been times when the request has been so ridiculous you don't even need to hear it, like anything more than what's coming out of their mouth, right? But what if they present it with logic and facts and research and appeal to real things? What is the likelihood that you're going to grant that request? I mean, it's going to greatly increase it, right? You guys see what Moses is doing here. He's using logic and reason. He's appealing to God's holiness, what's truly important, the things which would matter to God, right? I mean, he could have listed other reasons, have mercy upon us. He could have spent all of his time commenting on the flaws of the people, right? Could he have done that? Yeah, would that have got him very far? You know, it's like what Randy, you said he was appealing to his holiness and his glory, God's glory and stuff like this. I mean, you see how that is a well-reasoned, logical kind of a discussion here and how effective it was, Gary? Uh-huh. Oh yeah. 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 I mean, this is yeah, yeah. Well, think about it this way. I mean, if you think and it's wise to appeal to what the supervisor cares about, what they value. And Moses did that here, didn't he? Very wise in what he was saying. Now, here's did he have time to put all this together in a PowerPoint presentation? So, God, here's you talking to Abraham, here's the promised land you said we was going to have, what's remarkable about this? Heartfelt? It's right off the cuff, right? What does this tell us about Moses? Yeah, it says, I mean, this was information readily available to him. Don't you think? And I think that's important. Who? Moses? Oh, I guarantee it.
They both were angry. We just not at each other.
Oh, no. Yeah, they were both. Yeah, I think they both had righteous anger here. And absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Boy, I tell you, I get wound up thinking about what we're going to talk about here in a minute. So, Moses passed the test. He immediately began to pray for the people. He urged the Lord to consider three things: the power that he had already displayed on behalf of Israel, the possible blasphemous thoughts of the Egyptians if he should destroy the people, and the promise he had made to the patriarchs. That's a good three-point logical thesis that he's laid out here off the cuff. Now, God responded to the logic of this model intercessory prayer. He relented concerning the destruction which he had threatened. Now, y'all ready to have some fun? Somebody read verse 14. Yep. Okay. What part of this verse do you think we're going to talk about? Okay, now that is a really kind of a revolutionary statement, isn't it? God changing his mind. So let's go back to the fundamental attributes of God. The omnis. He's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, yes. So he's all powerful, all knowing, and everywhere at all times. So all present, is omnipresence, omnipotent, and omnipresent, omniscient. Can an omniscient, omnipotent being change his mind? See, there's another thing that we talk about with God is his aseity. I always remember Dr. Cottrell saying it this way, aseity. Right? And that means that he is... am I using the right word here? Yeah. No. Yes. Unchanging. What's another word that we... immutable. That he is unchanging. That God does not change. He is... what he is eternally and will not change. Same today, tomorrow, and forever. Amen, right? So God changes his mind. Does that go against that, Keith, and then Beth? Because he's merciful too. Okay. Okay, so would it not change his being if he learned something? Sure. Okay. So he knew. So he's omniscient. So he knows what Moses is going to do. He knows the outcome. So we got a problem here then, right? Because if God knows the outcome and He changes His mind, then this can't be right. Word of God must be wrong. That's true. Not likely. Made who go this way? So God was subject to Moses' decision? Okay. Okay. That is true. One of the other ultimate attributes of God is that He is love. He is holy. I hope everybody here realizes I'm messing with you here. I'm working you. I want you to think. The power of prayer. Okay, so what's happening here? This is a response to prayer, yes? Okay, so there will be atonement that needs to be made. Okay, but God changing His mind. Now that's a tricky phrase just in of itself. So let's dig into this a little bit more, because this is an important thing. This is a text that skeptics will use and abuse, and here's another group that has trouble with this. You guys should know this right off the top. What's another group that would have trouble with this statement? Say it, Randy. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good. Yeah, a lot of you got it. Calvinists had trouble with this, right? Now, let's think this through from that perspective based upon our study of Calvinism. So, we said that the eventual end-of-the-road worldview that the Calvinist ends up in is determinism. A deterministic universe, right? Where everything is decreed and nothing you can do to change it. It's all at the decree of God. Then what does that really, what aspect of our life as a Christian is really, would you be troubled with that understanding? Is prayer. Because when we pray to God, do we not petition Him to change the circumstances of things? They being the Calvinist? Sure. But I'm talking about the logic that underlies it. If I was a Calvinist, I wouldn't waste my time. Why pray? God's going to do what He's going to do regardless. But we see here that prayer, that God responded to this prayer, did He not? Because what was happening here? What was the possibilities? What were the two outcomes? Starting over with Moses, and we have indication here that God chose to honor Moses' prayer. So, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. So, the question is, does prayer change God? Does prayer change God? Now, one of the biggest problems raised in the minds of many people is this connection is that if God answers prayer, then somehow He must change. If my prayer causes God to do something He would not have done otherwise, then He must have changed His mind or His plan or His heart. Something about God has to change. That's what some think. Or, so it is said, Exodus 32:14 would seem to confirm this. So the Lord changed his mind about the harm which he had said he would do to his people in response to Moses' intercession for them. A writer by the name of Heller contends that what he calls primitive prayer, on which raw petition is the primary form, it presupposes the changeableness of God. Both the traditional, well, this is a really wordy sentence, so we're not going to settle into this. But both the traditional metaphysical philosophy and traditional theology agree that God must be unchangeable. What that's saying is that we can't have any kind of a theology that says that God in his nature changes. Would you agree with that? Okay. In his nature changes. So we can't affirm anything that says that God, his nature changes. So how can we say that God answers prayer without somehow diminishing the nature of God? The answer to this problem lies in the foreknowledge of God. Since God is unlimited by time, he has known from eternity every prayer that men would freely offer. You agree with that statement? Okay. Thus, in his own eternal and unchangeable decisions about everything he would and would not do in the course of this world's history, he was able to decide which prayers he would answer and which he would not answer from the very beginning. Now let's talk about this. So, what have we said that's a very important phrase? That foreknowledge, that foreknowing something does not equal predestination. Okay, there's a different word. That foreknowing does not equal... Okay, yeah, it doesn't equal causation. Because God knows something is going to happen does not mean that he caused it. Right? Because otherwise, him having foreknowledge of all of our actions and decisions, if that does equal causation, then that means that God causes these things. We're not willing to say that, right? Because we affirm the free will of man. We affirm the free will of man, and see, this is one of the really cool things about it. In the fact that we do have free will, it is because of free will and God's foreknowledge that we can pray. You see how awesome that setup is? The way God designed things is that he gave us the ability to have true communion and fellowship with him in prayer, and the fact that we can come to him and ask for things, and depending on what we ask, how persistent we are, then he would respond to those things. Now, in responding to those things, does that mean that God's nature changes in any way? No, it does not. His nature does not change. And so we're going to come up on another phrase that's really going to help us here in a little bit. So, God's foreknowledge. So, there is then no need for God to change his plans in response to our petitions. He has always known about these petitions, and he has always known what he has planned to do about them. Thus, the problem of answered prayer is similar in many ways to the problem of predestination. I heard that somebody say that. And the solution is the same. Answers to prayer are prearranged according to foreknowledge, just as faithful believers are predestined to glory according to foreknowledge. I'm trying to decide how deep in the weeds we want to get here. I've got a quote here from C.S. Lewis that's really quite amazing. He says, "We have long since agreed that if our prayers are granted at all, they are granted from the foundation of the world." Now, think about this for just a minute. Think about this for just a minute. Could God be orchestrating circumstances right now to pray a prayer that you haven't prayed yet? Or to answer a prayer that you haven't prayed yet? Are you with me on that? I just want you to think, that makes the hair on my arm stand up. See, God knows when he created things, he knows what you're going to pray. He could be orchestrating circumstances in order to answer our prayer, that are things that are happening in and around us right now at this moment in time for a prayer that I'm going to pray tomorrow. Have any thoughts or comments with that, or any thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, it makes me think about Paul asking God to heal him.
Who?
Paul.
Okay.
You know, because that pushed, he didn't answer Paul's prayer.
Okay.
I think it pushed him.
Okay. Could have.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It makes me think about that. You know?
Okay. There's some similarities there to what I'm saying. It's a little different nuance.
Does that make sense to you?
Kind of. It's a little different. We're still apples here. This might be the Granny Smith. Yours might be the Golden Delicious. I'm not saying did I say his mind was made up?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, he's saying that he, from long before it ever happened,
Sure.
it's already planned out.
Okay, planned?
He knows the answer to it.
Okay. Knowing the answer equals causation or planning, though? Yes. Certainly. Yeah, for whatever it is. I mean, God does. We'll get to some other understandings that should help. See, just because God knows what's going to happen and He's known since the beginning of the world does not negate our free will. See, in this moment in time, I have the ability to choose whether or not I will pray for something. God knows what the result is if I don't pray. He knows what the result is if I do pray, and all the different things that can come off of that. He knows all those simultaneously. Just because He knows those does not mean that it negates our free will. And since He does know what all the possibilities are, including what we will choose, then He can choose to answer, not answer, grant or not grant, those kind of things, and still work in and among His will. Okay, quick thought.
He knows what our free will is going to be, but He doesn't make our choice.
Yeah, He knows the results of what our free will decisions are. And since He knows the results, then He knows how He's going to respond to it. So let me ask, let's just listen to this. This might help. So, does prayer influence God? So, did prayer change God? Does prayer change God in His nature? No. But can prayer influence God? Yes. Because of foreknowledge, prayer does not change God. But because of foreknowledge, prayer does influence God. He takes into account our foreseen prayers and decides to do certain things just because of these prayers. Thus, prayer has a real effect upon the course of nature and history. A fellow by the name of Coleman says that the conviction that prayer affects events and circumstances as well as the one praying is one of the things that distinguish the evangelical from the liberal. Since prayer is nothing more nor less than an appeal to a person in present God, whose granting and withholding of the requested blessing is believed to be determined by the prayer itself, we must conclude that prayer moves God, or in other words, induces the putting forth on His part of an imperative volition. So, that's a really fancy way of saying that prayer does indeed influence God, does not change Him, but He will respond to our prayers. There was one more thing that I wanted to point out. This is cool. So what kind of God are we dealing with here when it comes to our prayers? This kind of God. That God is, when we pray, we make the assumption that He is a personal God because communication with Him is possible. That He is personal, and that we talk to Him as a person. We expect him to hear and understand and to be sympathetic. We expect him to be able to respond personally to our entreaties. We also, a second assumption when we pray, is that God is a God of power, that he is able to do what is necessary to answer our prayers. Since much prayer involves the natural world as such, as in prayers regarding the weather or healing, we must assume that God is in complete control of his universe, that it is the subject to his sovereign rule. Praying then is calling upon God to use his almighty power. So when we pray, it assumes that we understand that he's personal, that he's powerful. It also assumes that he is present. We bring our petitions to God. We are assuming that he is present with us in such a way that he can hear the most softly whispered prayer and even the unspoken prayers of our heart. When we pray, we know that God is here and thus he hears. And the last thing, prayers of petition assume the goodness of God. We would not even make an attempt to call upon God for help if we did not believe that he really cares about us and cares about what we need and what burdens lie upon our hearts. We do not expect him to ignore us or to laugh in our face or to tease us, since he loves us and wants what is good for us. Thus, we feel comfortable bringing our requests to him. So these assumptions concerning the nature of God are valid. He's personal, powerful, present, and good. Thus, our petitions are not in vain. So, key thing here is that our prayers do not change God, yet they influence him. That's the phrase that we can kind of wrap our minds around. Any questions? So when it says God changed his mind, does that mean that his nature was changed in that moment? No. So we're okay with that, right? But what it means is that had Moses not prayed, there would have been a different outcome. Now, that's a little bit of deep water there, and I appreciate you for swimming out there with me. We're just going to finish this section, and we didn't get very far at all. So, God responded to the logic of this model intercessory prayer. Back on page 6, he relented concerning the destruction which he had threatened. Forgiveness of the people had not yet been secured. You talked about that something's got to happen. But the Lord's first burst of anger was averted by Moses' prayer. Moses descended the mount carrying the 2 tablets of the testimony which had been inscribed on both sides by God himself. At some point in the descent, Joshua rejoined Moses. So we didn't read that far. So, verse 15, back in chapter 32, then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides. They were written on one side and the other, and the tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. Now, when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There is a sound of war in the camp." But he said, "It is not the sound of the cry of triumph, nor is the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear." Now, this is the last thing we'll talk about tonight. So Moses knows what's going on down below. He's prayed. God has relented for the moment. He has the tablets in hand, and now he's heading down the mountain. What do you think was... How do you picture him in this moment? Keith? Yeah, the mom march, yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, I'm going to tell a story. This one's on Larry. So I won't get into all the details, but when we were in Washington, D.C., and we were up on the way this hotel was, there has a large atrium where you could just come out your room and you could see everything that was happening down below in the atrium floor down there. And I didn't even have to ask, because I saw Larry streaking across the floor. He was madder than a hornet. And I'll eventually find out what, but he was on a mission to take care of something. Now, let's ask ourselves this question. I was cracking me up. I was like, oh, Kelly, something's wrong. Get back in the room. Get back in the room. All right. No. Yeah. 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 Oh, that's a cool shade of red you turned too during that whole. So, anyway, now you're all going to be asking, what happened? Don't ask him. That's a private matter. But I just get the image here. Now, when he's heading down the hill and Joshua comes up to him, what do you think their conversation was like? Do you think Moses said anything? Why? I don't think he said anything, because what did Joshua say when they were heading down? Is that the sound of war? See, Moses knew they were what they were doing. Joshua did not know. Moses, I don't believe, told him at this point, until they were close enough to hear and see what was going on. I just get this idea that he was like stone cold quiet and just the seething anger coming out of him. Probably Joshua's probably like, what is going on? Now, here's something else. I tend to believe that what happened at the foot of the hill was premeditated. What happened when he got down in front of the people? He smashed the tablets. I don't think that was just like he just lost it and did it. I think it was premeditated in what he was doing. Now, we're not there in the scripture just yet. We're almost there as he confronts this apostasy, dealing with the apostates in verse 19. But he smashes the tablets. And this is something I want you to think about. Do you guys realize how significant that is? It's exactly what it was. See, when we've had our discussions about covenants in the past, that would be no different than if you had a contract with someone and you going into them and tearing it up in front of them, throwing it in their face. Oh, boy. Did you just equate Nancy Pelosi with Moses? That's what I heard. Elders, we need to have a meeting afterwards. Okay. But we'll talk about that next week and how significant it was, because it's just incredible. Because in essence, that is the Moses, with God's approval in that moment, this covenant is destroyed. You have broken this covenant. I don't know that he told him, but I possibly. I don't think it was. I mean, I do think there was anger on his part, but it was for a purpose. You know, it was for a purpose. Did I see a hand? Yeah. 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 And something's going to have to take place here if we're going to be able to move forward, because they're not out of the woods yet. Even though Moses has prayed, they're not out of the woods yet. In fact, there's going to be some other prayers that happen on here that change God's mind again. Doesn't use that terminology per se, but you're going to see how Moses's about his prayers change things once more for what was going to be happening. We're going to see that next week. All right, any questions or comments? Thank you all for digging into some of that stuff. So, please know that your prayers are extremely important, and that even though that God knows what you're going to choose and He knows how He's going to respond to it, you still have the free will and the necessity to pray. We're commanded to do so, and we understand the many benefits that come from it. Okay, any other comments? Go ahead. Right. Sure.
He has time and he knows it's coming, but it's
Right.
almost like he does.
Well,
And I mean, I know he does, but it's almost
right.
like he does it because
One thing that could help us in that moment is to realize that God himself is not subject to time. He's outside of time. So everything that's occurring, he sees as present. And that is something that's hard for us to wrap our minds around. Because everything we think about is a sequence of events. But we understand in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth in that moment of time, that time was created. Time, space, and matter were created, and God's outside of time. He's not subject to it. So we think of a sequence of events, how we respond and react to things. It's different for God, but it's really quite fascinating when we start considering these things. So if anybody ever says that your Bible's wrong, you know, on this verse and stuff, we know how to respond to it now, right? All right, excellent.
Change needs to be influenced.
Well, if you want, or your essence, yes, and so that's the point that we need to make is, he, in essence, and for a way that we can understand it, is that his mind was changed, but that did not limit his omniscience. So he didn't change his essence. Yep, and that's the important thing we need to remember here. Okay, any other comments, questions?